It was just 2 days before the Afghan New Year. The air was filled with the excitement of festivities. And for 27-year-old Farkhundan Malikzada, life felt full of hope, promises, and aspirations. She had plans to help her mother, Bibi Hajera, prepare for the celebrations once she got home from her Quran reciting class. With a bright smile, Farkhundan kissed her young nephew and walked out the door, full of hope and dreams for the future. Farkhundan had just completed her degree in Islamic studies and volunteered as a teacher in an Islamic school, with ambitions of one day becoming a judge to fight crimes and injustice in Afghanistan society. She was intelligent, passionate, and had a fearless spirit. Farkhundan wasn't afraid to speak her mind, even when it meant standing up for what she believed was right. Her mother, Bibi Hajera, often spoke of how brave Farkhundan was. But that day, no one could have known that the events that would unfold would change their lives and the country forever. Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, is a busy city with a population of over 4 million people, located in the eastern part of the country. The city has a long history as a cultural and political center for many years. But in recent decades, it has faced significant challenges due to war, political instability, and economic hardship. Despite the difficult conditions, the people of Kabul are known for their resilience, hospitality, strong family values, with many people still engaging in social gatherings, religious practices, and family activities. Women, however, often face restrictions and cultural expectations, leaving them vulnerable to misunderstandings and conflicts caused by religious differences. In the heart of Kabul lies the Shah Dusham Shira Mosque, often described as the Afghan Baroque. The mosque serves as a place of worship for local Muslims for daily prayers and religious observance. March 19, 2015, was a day that can never be forgotten in Kabul, Afghanistan. On her way home that day, Farkhundan stopped at the Shah Dusham Shira shrine to pray like she always did. But that afternoon, something was different. Farkhundan, who was always outspoken about what she believed, noticed a man, Mullah Zainuddin, the shrine's caretaker and a street vendor across the street selling amulets and charms, which Farkhundan believed was against Islamic law. She approached the man with a calm but firm voice, telling him that it was wrong to sell amulets and charms in the mosque. She explained that such practices went against the teachings of Islam. She spoke with conviction, repeatedly warning him about the harm of engaging in such acts. As she continued, the man grew defensive, feeling the weight of her criticism. He didn't want to bear the shame of having his business exposed, especially by a woman. In a desperate attempt to protect himself, he turned the tables and falsely accused her. He shouted that Farkhundan had burned the Quran, a lie that would forever change her life. He started shouting, "This woman is an American. She has burned the Quran." At that moment, everything changed. People in the crowd began to gather. Some pulled out their phones to record. The police attempted to take her, but because she was a devoted Muslim and Islamic law practitioner, she demanded for a female police. The mob were so angry that even the police were unable to keep her safe. What happened next would be something no one could forget. "Why did you burn the Quran?" a man shouted from the mob. She denied the accusation, insisting, "I did not burn the Quran." But the mob didn't listen. They began to drag her outside the shrine, throwing insults and kicks at her. As they continued, a voice from the mob yelled, "Kill her!" In this chaos, Farkhundan, now on the ground, bruised and beaten without recognition, tried to defend herself. But no one came to her aid. The police stood by, powerless to stop what was happening. As she sat there, dazed, with blood dripping from her face and her veil torn off, she gazed into the cameras. Her hand was bloody, her head was bleeding, and one of her shoes had fallen off. At that moment, she cried out. To anyone watching, it was clear Farkhunda was in agony. Yet, the police did nothing. They stood by as the mob continued its savage assault. They allowed Farkhunda to be kicked, beaten with sticks, and even run over by a car that dragged her lifeless body for over 300 meters. Her mother, Bibi Hajera, later spoke of the unbearable image of her daughter, sitting with her head bleeding as the police did nothing to help. She couldn't understand why no one stepped in. Why didn't they stop the violence? As the violence against Farkhunda continued, it was no longer just a horrific act of anger. It was a public execution, streamed across the world by people filming on their phones. The mob, unable to stop their fury, took her body to a dry riverbed, where they stoned her. They threw large rocks at her lifeless body before setting it on fire. The act was a horrifying peak of hate, violence, and false accusations. In the days that followed, the video footage went viral. Some celebrated what had happened, even boasting online about their part in it. But others were horrified by the gruesome incident. President Ashraf Ghani condemned the brutal murder and promised an investigation. Yet, some officials initially defended the mob's actions. The lies about Farkhunda burning the Quran began to spread like wildfire. But by the next day, the investigation revealed there was no evidence to support the claim. Farkhunda had done nothing wrong. It was all a horrible, tragic mistake. Farkhunda's family, meanwhile, was told to leave Kabul for their own safety. Farkhunda's mother, Bibi Hajera, recalls the painful moment she went to the mortuary to identify her daughter's body. Her body was burned, bruised, and battered. Her hands and face were swollen, a haunting reminder of the violence she endured. Bibi Hajera was heartbroken, feeling that her daughter was crying out to her in silence. "I was innocent. I was innocent, mother." The anger and grief that poured out in the wake of Farkhunda's death sparked a movement. Farkhunda went from being despised to becoming a symbol of justice. At her funeral, over 1,000 people gathered to honor her life. It was the first time in Afghanistan that women had carried a coffin to a grave, an unprecedented act of solidarity in a society that often holds strict gender roles. Women stood together, refusing to let men take control of the funeral. A few days later, thousands of men and women marched through Kabul chanting, "We are all Farkhunda." Their voices demanded justice, but the journey was far from over. Farkhunda's death had sparked a new movement. But would it change Afghanistan for good? In the trial that followed, 49 men were charged for their role in the murder. Several police officers were also sentenced for their failure to act. Zainul-Din, the shrine's caretaker, was sentenced to death, as was Yaqub, the young man who had joined in stoning Farkhunda. But despite this, Farkhunda's family still faced struggles. Most of the attackers were not extremist radicals, but ordinary Afghans, men who wore jeans and t-shirts, not traditional robes. Men who had grown up in a modernizing Kabul, yet still harbored deep-seated misogyny. This wasn't just about Farkhunda. It was about a society that had lived in violence and patriarchy for so long, they couldn't even see their own hatred for what it was. Her story became a wake-up call for Afghanistan. Rula Ghani, the wife of the president, said, "Every Afghan had to ask themselves, would I want my sister or daughter to face this kind of violence?" Farkhunda was officially declared a martyr, and her name was honored, but real change, true change, would take time. Afghanistan had to look deeply into its own soul and face the truth about the violence against women that ran through its society. Even today, Farkhunda's story is not just remembered. It serves as a reminder that there is still much work to be done. Sara Mosawi, a women's rights activist, said, "We have to keep fighting to improve things. This country has to be better than this." And as for Farkhunda's mother, Bibi Hajera, she remains proud of her daughter, as her name is still alive in the history of Kabul, Afghanistan. If you find this story intriguing, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more stories.